Utilitarianism, Act or Rule, by Stephen Darwall. This article has three main parts. The first part is a restatement of Act utilitarianism. We're going to skip this part. The second part is a discussion of some objections to Act utilitarianism. The last part is a discussion of how a different kind of consequentialist theory called rule utilitarianism can survive the objections that plague Act utilitarianism. First, some critics object to Act utilitarianism on the basis that often there is not enough time for a person to think about all the possible actions and calculate which one will have the best consequences in terms of utility. This concern can be alleviated, though, by pointing out that on Act utilitarianism, people should not take the time to deliberate when that will have bad consequences, such as in an emergency situation. Furthermore, people have developed rules of thumb to help them figure out which actions tend to have good consequences, and we can use these to save time. For instance, following the golden rule and treating others as you would want to be treated often, if not always, has good consequences in terms of utility. Second, there is the objection that Act utilitarianism may seem to require that we love all people equally. You might think that loving everyone equally is entailed by Act utilitarianism's requirement that we give every person in the world the same weight in our moral decision-making. But this objection is just mistaken. Special relationships, like those between spouses and close friends, bring humans a lot of happiness, so they might actually be morally required. In any case, Act utilitarianism doesn't require that we love people equally, just that we treat them fairly. These next four objections, however, are not so easily resolved. Third, Act utilitarianism goes against common sense because it allows or even morally requires that a person break a promise when that would have good consequences or when keeping it would have bad consequences. Promises are backward-looking moral considerations. They are incurred by transactions made in the past. But Act utilitarianism is exclusively forward-looking, caring only about what effect on utility an action will have in the future. So, when a promise is secret or made to someone who has died, etc., Act utilitarianism provides no moral basis for keeping it, and that is objectionable. Fourth, there are other actions, like breaking a promise, that may seem wrong to you intrinsically or in themselves, regardless of how good their consequences may turn out to be. However, for any action that you might think is always wrong, it is fairly easy to imagine a counterexample in which Act utilitarianism would permit the action for the sake of better consequences. For example, acts of betrayal or dishonesty. Can you think of scenarios in which those acts would be permitted by Act utilitarianism? Fifth, there is a problem with Act utilitarianism because it does not account for the moral asymmetry of harm and benefit. Imagine that you can benefit your friend Brown by stealing a cupcake from Green and giving it to her, resulting in an equal trade-off between Green's pain and Brown's pleasure. Here, common sense seems to hold that the duty not to cause harm is stronger than the duty to benefit. The fact that causing harm to Green will cause an equal benefit to Brown is normally thought insufficient to justify the harm to Green. But on Act utilitarianism, trading off utility across different people is acceptable, so long as one maximizes the total happiness which results. Avoiding harming someone is equally as important as helping another, but no more so. Sixth, act utilitarianism has some counterintuitive results for distributive justice, or fairness in the way things of value are deliberately spread around a group, usually by the government, such as through taxes. From the perspective of act utilitarianism, only the grand total of happiness matters. But the same total can be achieved through various different distributions of happiness. Take a look at the chart on page 105 of your book. The top line represents a distribution in which one person suffers in order for everyone else to do rather well. The bottom line represents an egalitarian distribution, where everyone is happy, but only a little bit. Many people feel as though the egalitarian distribution is morally better, being fair. But on act utilitarianism, the two distributions are morally equivalent. So there are some objections to act utilitarianism for which we have no easy solution. Need we abandon consequentialist moral theorizing altogether? There is another possibility, rule utilitarianism. Rule utilitarianism says an act is wrong if and only if it is contrary to a possible rule, such that were society to have a practice of enforcing that rule, formally or informally, this practice would maximize overall net happiness. We can compare act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism using the forced organ donation case. Think of a case wherein one person's body could be divided up into transplant organs that save the lives of 5 others. If this case is imagined carefully enough, that is, the donator is not too famous or important and the doctor is competent, then act utilitarianism will morally require that the donator be sacrificed to save the others. However, rule utilitarianism may not require the forced organ donation. Although the act of harvesting the organs could have the best consequences in this particular scenario, the general rule allowing doctors to perform forced organ harvesting might very well have suboptimal consequences in the long run. For instance, people would no longer trust doctors or take themselves to the hospital for care even when needed. These changes would very negatively affect the overall happiness level of a population. So, on rule utilitarianism, there would probably be a rule prohibiting forced organ donation and harvesting, and this makes rule utilitarianism more plausible than act utilitarianism. As we have seen, there are quite a few objections to act utilitarianism. Some are easily handled, but others are not. However, we needn't give up consequentialist moral theorizing altogether. Rule utilitarianism is a plausible alternative to act utilitarianism that would merit further attention, if only we had the time.